The mist clung to the cemetery like a shroud, weaving between weathered tombstones that jutted from the earth like forgotten memories. Thomas had been the gravedigger here for 30 years, his calloused hands knowing the soil's secrets better than anyone. That evening, as dusk bled across the sky, he spotted a figure in an expensive coat marking certain headstones with red paint. Old graves. Forgotten names. The man worked methodically, checking a list, his movements precise and deliberate. Thomas remained hidden, watching. Something about those red marks felt like a violation of the dead's final peace. Subscribe to hear what Thomas discovers when he follows the mysterious man's trail. Thomas hadn't chosen to be a gravedigger. The profession had chosen him after his wife Sarah died in childbirth 27 years ago. The cemetery had offered solace then, a quiet place where grief could breathe without judgment. Now, at 58, his weathered face mapped the decades spent tending to the dead, finding more comfort among silent tombstones than the chatter of the living. Each grave he dug was an act of reverence. Thomas believed that how people were laid to rest mattered, even when no one was watching. Especially then. He'd witnessed how quickly the living forgot, how families stopped visiting, how names eroded from stone long before memories faded from hearts. The wound of Sarah's passing had scarred over, but never truly healed. Their daughter Emma had grown up and moved away, calling only on holidays. Thomas kept Sarah's grave immaculate, fresh flowers every Sunday, regardless of weather or season. It was his unspoken promise. The following morning, Thomas returned to investigate the red-marked graves. He recognized most of the names, ordinary people buried decades ago, their descendants long gone from town. As he examined the crude markings, a black luxury car pulled up on the cemetery's main path. The same man from yesterday emerged, this time accompanied by two surveyors carrying equipment. Thomas approached them, clutching his shovel. "Excuse me, sir. May I ask what you're doing with these graves?" The man, tall, with silver-streaked hair and a tailored suit that cost more than Thomas earned in months, barely glanced at him. "Cemetery business. Nothing that concerns maintenance staff. I'm the caretaker," Thomas corrected. "These marks. Ah, the digger." The man smiled thinly. "Well, digger, the city council has approved my development proposal. These plots haven't been visited in decades. After proper procedures, they'll be relocated to make way for a memorial garden honoring my father." Several council members emerged from a second vehicle. They nodded politely to Thomas, but deferred to the wealthy man. "Mr. Harrington's donation is quite generous," one councilwoman explained. "The cemetery needs modernization." Thomas noticed one marked grave, Sarah's. His hands trembled as Harrington dismissed him with a wave. "Perhaps find another shovel to lean on. We have work to do." The councilors chuckled, and Thomas felt the weight of his insignificance crushing down like fresh soil on a new grave. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The image of Sarah's grave, marked with that vulgar red paint, haunted him. He tossed and turned until dawn broke, then dressed and returned to the cemetery earlier than usual. The morning mist clung to the headstones like ghosts reluctant to depart. He found Harrington already there with his surveyors, mapping the marked graves. Thomas approached, his voice steadier than his heart. "Mr. Harrington, I need to speak with you about my wife's grave." Harrington glanced up from his tablet. "Your wife? Which one is that?" "Sarah Miller. Plot 217. You've marked it, but it can't be relocated. My family has owned that plot for generations." Harrington's eyes narrowed. "Ah, yes. I reviewed all the deeds. Your ownership expires next year, a 99-year lease. The council has already approved early termination with compensation." Compensation? Thomas felt his throat tighten. "My wife is there. My unborn child." "Sentiment doesn't change progress," Harrington replied, turning to his associates. "Jenkins, show him the paperwork." As Thomas examined the documents, Harrington addressed his team loudly enough for others to hear. "Some people simply can't understand vision. This memorial will honor my father's legacy while beautifying this decrepit place. The digger should be thanking me for improving his workplace." The surveyors chuckled, and Thomas felt his face burn with humiliation. A week later, Thomas arrived to find construction stakes driven into the ground around the marked graves. A small crowd had gathered, council members, local press, and Harrington at the center, posing for photographs. "Our resident gravedigger," Harrington called out when he spotted Thomas. "Come join us. We're breaking ground next month." Thomas approached cautiously. I've filed an appeal with the Historical Society. Some of these graves have historical significance. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Already addressed. The Historical Society is receiving a new wing courtesy of Harrington Industries. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, squeezing slightly too hard. Perhaps you misunderstand your position here. You dig holes. You don't make decisions. A reporter raised her camera. Mr. Harrington, how about a photo with the longtime caretaker? Before Thomas could object, Harrington pulled him into frame. This man has served this cemetery faithfully for decades. Soon he'll have a much more beautiful place to tend, thanks to progress. The flash captured Thomas's mortification as Harrington announced to the crowd, "We've even offered him continued employment, though at his age, retirement might be wiser." Thomas hadn't been informed of either option. The following afternoon, Thomas discovered workers removing items from graves, including the carved wooden cross he'd placed on Sarah's 20 years ago. "Stop!" he shouted, rushing forward. Harrington emerged from his car, flanked by security. "Mr. Miller, you're becoming a nuisance. These are preliminary preparations, all approved." "That's my wife's cross," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "It's not original to the burial and violates cemetery regulations," Harrington replied coldly. "I've been patient with your interference, but this ends now." He nodded to security. "Please escort Mr. Miller off the premises. He's suspended pending review." As the guards approached, Thomas stood his ground. "You can't do this." "I already have," Harrington smirked. "The deed to this entire cemetery now belongs to Harrington Memorial Trust." As Thomas was led away, one of the workers whispered, "Sorry, old man, just following orders." What Harrington couldn't know was that before becoming a gravedigger, Thomas had been a paralegal for 20 years. His small apartment contained meticulously organized files documenting every burial, deed transfer, and cemetery bylaw since 1910, records he'd salvaged when the old administration office was cleaned out. Among them lay the truth about the Harrington family's past and the real reason behind this memorial garden. That evening, Judge Eleanor Blackwood watched from her car across the street. She'd known Thomas for decades. "Interesting," she murmured, tucking away her binoculars. "Perhaps it's time to revisit the Harrington estate ruling." Thomas Miller sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of yellowed papers and leather-bound ledgers. The small apartment, which had always felt cozy, now seemed like a war room. His fingers, calloused from decades of digging graves, now carefully turned fragile pages of cemetery records dating back over a century. "There it is," he whispered, adjusting his reading glasses. The document before him was a deed transfer from 1943, showing that the northeast corner of the cemetery, precisely where Harrington planned his most extravagant memorial features, had never actually been incorporated into the main cemetery property. It had been donated separately by the Wilcox family with specific conditions. It must remain undeveloped in perpetuity, with all graves preserved. Thomas smiled grimly. His years as a paralegal, before Sarah's illness, had taught him that the devil was always in the details. People assumed he was just an old man who dug holes, but he understood property law better than most attorneys in town. He reached for another folder, this one containing newspaper clippings from the 1930s. The headline read, "Local businessman accused of grave desecration." The article detailed allegations against Maxwell Harrington, Richard's grandfather, for attempting to relocate paupers' graves to expand his factory. The case had been settled quietly, but Thomas had kept every document. A knock at his door startled him. Through the peephole, he saw Judge Eleanor Blackwood standing in the hallway, her silver hair neatly pinned back. "Eleanor," he said, opening the door. "This is unexpected. May I come in, Thomas?" she asked, her eyes taking in the papers spread across his table. "I see you've been busy." Once inside, she declined his offer of tea. "I don't have much time. I wanted to check on you after what happened at the cemetery." Thomas gestured to his research. "I'm not going down without a fight." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "I thought as much. The Harrington Memorial Trust case crossed my desk 5 years ago. I always felt something was irregular about it." "The trust is a sham," Thomas said, pulling out another document. "Look at this. The original Harrington will specify that family wealth should establish a public garden accessible to all citizens. Richard twisted it into this memorial garden that's really just a vanity project." Eleanor examined the document carefully. This could be grounds to reopen the case. "But Thomas, you should know Richard Harrington has considerable influence. 3 judges recused themselves before the case landed with me. I'm not afraid of him, Thomas said firmly. Perhaps you should be, Eleanor replied. But I admire your courage. What's your plan? Thomas smiled. I'm going to give Mr. Harrington a history lesson. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the public records office when it opened. The clerk, Mrs. Patel, greeted him warmly. Thomas, haven't seen you in years. Not since you helped me sort out that easement issue with my neighbor. I need to file some documents in Dira, he said, placing a thick envelope on the counter. And I need certified copies of everything in this file number. He slid her a note. Mrs. Patel raised an eyebrow. The Harrington Trust documents? That's quite a request. It's important, Thomas said simply. She lowered her voice. I heard what happened at the cemetery. My grandfather is buried there. She glanced around the empty office. Give me an hour. While waiting, Thomas visited the newspaper office across the street. The young reporter who had photographed him with Harrington looked up in surprise. Mr. Miller, right? The cemetery caretaker. Former paralegal, actually, Thomas corrected. I have a story you might be interested in. It's about the Harrington Memorial Garden and some historical documents that contradict Mr. Harrington's claims. The reporter, Sophia Chin, according to her nameplate, leaned forward. I'm listening. By noon, Thomas had filed legal documents challenging the Harrington Trust's ownership of the Northeast Cemetery section, provided historical records to the local newspaper, and submitted a formal request to the Historical Society to designate several graves as protected landmarks. His final stop was City Hall, where the Planning Commission was meeting. He waited patiently through discussions of zoning variances and building permits until the public comment period. My name is Thomas Miller, he began, standing at the podium. For 30 years, I've served as caretaker of Oakwood Cemetery. I'm here to present evidence that the proposed Harrington Memorial Garden violates multiple deed restrictions, historical preservation ordinances, and the original terms of the Harrington Family Trust. He methodically laid out his case, placing documents on the overhead projector. The commission members exchanged uncomfortable glances as he revealed that 3 of the unmarked graves Harrington planned to remove belonged to Civil War veterans. He showed photographs of the original Harrington family plot, where Richard's own ancestors were buried, in the very section he now claimed had no historical significance. Finally, Thomas said, I'd like to draw your attention to this. He projected an image of a small, weathered headstone. This belongs to Mary Wilcox, age 8, who died in 1918 during the influenza pandemic. Her family donated the land where she's buried with the explicit condition it remained undeveloped. Mr. Harrington has painted her grave for removal. A murmur ran through the audience. Thomas continued, the Wilcox donation deed specifically states that if these conditions are violated, ownership reverts to the descendants. I've located Mary's great-nephew, Dr. James Wilcox, who has signed this affidavit asserting his family's claim. The commission chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, these are serious allegations. We'll need to review these documents before proceeding with any approvals. As Thomas gathered his papers, he noticed Richard Harrington standing at the back of the room, face flushed with anger. Their eyes met briefly before Harrington turned and stormed out. That evening, Thomas returned to his apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, he pushed it open to discover his files scattered across the floor, drawers emptied, and his computer missing. Looking for something, came a voice from the darkness. Thomas spun around to find Richard Harrington, sitting in his armchair. Breaking and entering is a crime, Mr. Harrington, Thomas said calmly, though his hands trembled slightly. Harrington stood, straightening his expensive suit. So is defamation. You've made some very public, very damaging claims today. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Thomas replied. Truth. Harrington laughed coldly. You're an old man grasping at straws because you can't accept progress. My lawyers will bury you in paperwork until you're as dead as those graves you're so concerned about. Your grandfather tried the same tactics in 1938, Thomas said. It didn't work then either. Harrington's smile faltered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've built an empire. I own half this town, but not its history, Thomas replied, and not its soul. Harrington stepped closer. I came here to offer you a deal, a generous retirement package, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you have to do is retract your statements and stay quiet. Like you paid off the Historical Society? Thomas asked. Everyone has a price, Harrington said. Even you. Thomas shook his head. Not everyone. Some things matter more than money. We'll see about that. Harrington moved toward the door. You have until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, I can't be responsible for what happens. After Harrington left, Thomas sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 70 years. His phone rang, startling him. Thomas? It's Eleanor. Are you all right? Harrington was just here, he said. Threatened me. There was a pause. I was afraid of that. Listen carefully. I've assigned a court clerk to make copies of everything you filed today. The originals are being placed in the court's sealed records. Even if Harrington's people try to make them disappear from public records, we'll have protected copies. Thank you, Eleanor. There's more, she continued. I've spoken with Judge Martinez. He's agreed to hear your petition for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning. And Thomas, I've arranged for a deputy to park outside your building tonight. Just as a precaution, Thomas looked out his window and saw the patrol car already in place. Get some rest, Eleanor said. Tomorrow, we remind Mr. Harrington that in this town, even the powerful must answer to the law. As Thomas hung up, he noticed a small envelope that had been slipped under his door. Inside was a single gold-plated key and a note in elegant handwriting, southwest corner of the courthouse basement. Cabinet 37. The original Harrington will is there. Use it wisely. Thomas smiled. Sometimes, even in the darkest moments, light found a way to break through. What do you think will happen next in Thomas's battle against Harrington? Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. The next morning, Thomas found his apartment ransacked. On his desk lay a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1938 showing both Harrington's grandfather and Thomas's father standing over a mass grave. Scrawled across it in red, some secrets should stay buried. Both families will fall. Thomas stared at the newspaper clipping, his hands trembling slightly. The red ink seemed to glow against the yellowed paper, a threat as clear as it was ominous. He carefully placed the clipping in his pocket and surveyed the damage to his apartment. Books had been pulled from shelves, drawers emptied onto the floor, even his mattress had been slashed. But the intruders hadn't found what they were looking for. The gold-plated key remained safe in the inner pocket of his jacket, where he'd kept it close all night. The courthouse opened at 8. Thomas arrived at 7:30, nodding to the security guard who recognized him from his decades of work at the cemetery. Early business today, Mr. Blackwood? The guard asked. The earliest kind, Henry, Thomas replied. The kind that can't wait. The basement of the courthouse was a labyrinth of filing cabinets, storage rooms, and forgotten municipal history. The air hung heavy with dust and the peculiar smell of aging paper. Thomas's flashlight cut through the dim light as he made his way to the southwest corner. Cabinet 37 stood apart from the others, its brass handle tarnished with age. The gold-plated key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, Thomas found a single document folder, bound with faded red ribbon. The last will and testament of Edward Harrington Sr., dated 1937. Thomas carefully opened it, his eyes widening as he read. This was nothing like the will that had been executed after Edward's death. This was the smoking gun. His phone vibrated. A text from Eleanor, Harrington's lawyers filing motion to dismiss. Hearing moved up to 9 a.m. Where are you? Thomas quickly photographed each page of the will with his phone, then replaced the document exactly as he'd found it. As he locked the cabinet, he heard footsteps approaching. Who's down here? The security guard's voice echoed through the basement. Thomas slipped behind a row of cabinets, holding his breath as the beam of a flashlight swept past. When the footsteps receded, he made his way to the stairs and out of the basement. Eleanor was waiting for him on the courthouse steps, her face tight with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said. Maybe I have, Thomas replied, showing her the photos on his phone. The ghost of Edward Harrington Sr.'s true intentions. Eleanor's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. This changes everything. But Thomas, Harrington has 3 senior partners for his law firm here today. They're going to try to bury us in legal jargon. Then we'd better not give them the chance, Thomas said. Courtroom 3 was already filling with spectators when they arrived. News of the confrontation between the cemetery caretaker and the town's wealthiest developer had spread quickly. Thomas recognized faces from the Historical Society, several of his neighbors, and even a few reporters from the local paper. Richard Harrington sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits. He smirked when Thomas entered, leaning over to whisper something to the attorney beside him. Judge Martinez called the court to order precisely at 9. We're here on the matter of Blackwood versus Harrington Development Corporation regarding the emergency injunction to halt construction at the Old North Cemetery. Mr. Blackwood, I understand you're representing yourself. With assistance from Ms. Eleanor Winters, Your Honor, Thomas replied. Very well. And I see Harrington Development has brought considerable legal firepower. Mr. Peterson, your lead counsel, a silver-haired attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. And we've prepared a motion to dismiss this frivolous action that's clearly designed to harass our client and delay a properly permitted development project. Your Honor, Thomas interjected, before we proceed, I'd like to submit new evidence that directly pertains to the ownership and protected status of the cemetery land. Harrington's attorney scoffed. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of last-minute tactic. I'll allow it, Judge Martinez said firmly. Mr. Blackwood approached. Thomas handed the judge his phone with the photographs of the original will. Your Honor, this is the original will of Edward Harrington Sr., dated 1937. It specifically designates the Old North Cemetery as protected land in perpetuity, to be maintained as a memorial to the victims of the influenza epidemic of 1918, including members of both the Harrington and Blackwood families. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Richard Harrington leaned forward, his face darkening. Furthermore, Thomas continued, the will stipulates that any Harrington descendant who attempts to develop this land will forfeit their inheritance rights. The will that was executed after Edward Harrington Sr.'s death in 1938 was a forgery, created after his son, the current Mr. Harrington's grandfather, had the original suppressed. This is absurd, Harrington shouted, rising to his feet. Your Honor, these are fabricated documents. There's no proof of authenticity. The original is in Cabinet 37 in the courthouse basement archives, Thomas replied calmly. I'm sure the court can verify its authenticity. Judge Martinez studied the photographs carefully. Mr. Peterson, did your client disclose the existence of this earlier will during the permitting process? The attorney looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, we had no knowledge of. That's not true, Thomas interrupted. I have here a newspaper clipping from 1938 that Mr. Harrington or his associates left in my ransacked apartment this morning. He produced the yellowed paper with its ominous red message. It shows both families at the cemetery. Mr. Harrington knew exactly what he was doing when he marked those graves for removal. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Harrington approached the bench. Richard Harrington moved forward, his confidence visibly shaken. Did you authorize someone to enter Mr. Blackwood's residence? The judge asked. Of course not, Harrington replied smoothly. For all we know, he staged the break-in himself. And the red paint on the graves? The same color as the threat on this clipping. Coincidence? Construction markings only. Judge Martinez leaned back. I'm granting the emergency injunction, halting all construction at the cemetery pending a full investigation of these documents. Additionally, I'm ordering police protection for Mr. Blackwood and forensic examination of his apartment. Harrington's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. Do you have any idea how much money is at stake? Mr. Harrington, the judge replied coldly, in my courtroom, the law matters more than money. You do well to remember that. As the gavel fell, Thomas felt a moment of relief. But when he turned, he found Richard Harrington standing directly in his path. You think this is over? Harrington hissed. You have no idea what you've started. There are things about both our families that should remain buried. Things that will destroy us both if they come to light. Thomas met his gaze steadily. Then perhaps it's time we both face the truth, whatever it may be. Harrington's eyes narrowed. You have until sundown to withdraw everything. After that, I can't be responsible for what happens to you, or to those graves you care so much about. As Harrington stormed out, Eleanor touched Thomas's arm. What will you do? Thomas looked down at the newspaper clipping, at the two men standing over the mass grave, his father and Harrington's grandfather. What secret could be so terrible that both families might fall? I need to go back to the cemetery, he said quietly. Tonight, the cemetery lay silent under the pale moonlight as Thomas made his way through the iron gates. He carried a small lantern, its glow casting long shadows across the weathered tombstones. The red markings on the old graves seemed to pulse with malevolent energy in the darkness. He found himself drawn to the oldest section, where generations of both families rested. As he approached, he noticed a figure already there, Richard Harrington, kneeling before one of the marked graves, a bottle of whiskey beside him. "I knew you'd come," Harrington said without turning. His voice had lost its earlier arrogance, replaced by something that sounded almost like resignation. "What are you doing here?" Thomas asked, keeping his distance. Harrington took a long drink. "Facing ghosts. Isn't that why you're here too?" He gestured toward the grave he knelt before. "Elizabeth Blackwood. Your great-grandmother, I believe." Thomas stepped closer, noticing for the first time that Harrington had a small container of gold paint beside him. One of the red-marked graves now bore a freshly painted name in gleaming gold. "Why?" Thomas asked. "Because some debts can never be repaid," Harrington replied, his voice breaking. "But acknowledgement is the beginning of atonement." He handed Thomas a weather journal. "My grandfather's private diary. I found it years ago, but couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Read page 47. Thomas opened the brittle pages carefully. The handwriting was cramped but legible. Edward Blackwood discovered our substitution of the mine's safety reports. He threatened exposure. Father arranged an accident in the south shaft. 12 men died, including Blackwood. We buried them together and paid the widows for silence. The Blackwood woman refused our money. She knows too much." Thomas felt his blood run cold. The mine collapse wasn't an accident. No, Harrington admitted. Your great-grandfather discovered my family was cutting corners on safety. When he threatened to expose them, they silenced him, and 11 others died to make it look like an accident. And the will changed to ensure the Blackwoods would never have the resources to investigate further. Harrington's shoulders slumped. 3 generations of my family built their fortune on those deaths. I spent my life trying to outrun that knowledge. Is that why you wanted to develop this land? To bury the evidence forever? Harrington nodded slowly. The engineers found the original mine entrance during the survey. If they'd continued digging, he trailed off. I convinced myself I was protecting my family's legacy, but I was just continuing the cover-up. Dawn was breaking as Thomas closed the journal. I'll be taking this to the district attorney. I know. Harrington stood unsteadily. The company will pay reparations to the descendants of all the miners. And I've already called my attorney to withdraw the development proposal. It won't bring them back, Thomas said. No, Harrington agreed. But perhaps it will let them rest. He gestured to the gold-painted name. I'll restore them all before I turn myself in. It's the least I can do. As Thomas walked away, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice would come, but imperfectly. The truth would heal some wounds while opening others. The Harrington Empire would crumble, but no punishment could truly balance the scales for lives cut short nearly a century ago. At the cemetery gate, he paused and looked back. Harrington was still there, meticulously painting another name in gold, his shoulders bent with the weight of inherited guilt. In that moment, Thomas understood that some debts could never be fully repaid, but acknowledgement was indeed the beginning of atonement. 3 months later, Thomas returned to his daily routine at the cemetery, though everything had changed. The Harrington case had made national headlines, with the company paying millions in reparations to the miners' descendants. Thomas himself had received a substantial settlement, enough to renovate the cemetery and establish a memorial for the 12 men who died in that accident nearly a century ago. The development plans had been permanently abandoned, and the cemetery was now protected as a historical site. Each morning, Thomas would walk among the graves, no longer burdened by uncertainty about their future. The golden names gleamed in the sunlight. Harrington had finished restoring them all before his sentencing. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas noticed an elderly woman placing flowers at Elizabeth Blackwood's grave. She wore a pendant that caught his attention, an unusual symbol he'd seen before in his great-grandmother's few remaining possessions. "Excuse me," he called gently. "Did you know her?" The woman smiled mysteriously. "Not personally, but our families share a connection deeper than blood." She handed him a small, ornate key. "This belongs to you now. When you're ready, visit the address in this envelope. There are truths about your family and this town that weren't recorded in any journal." Before Thomas could respond, she walked away, disappearing among the tombstones like a ghost returning home. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to hear more tales of buried secrets and family mysteries. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below.